I want to tell you about a case today that occurred in the 1960s in Penfield, New York, just outside of Rochester. And it's a case that resulted in the longest served prison sentence in New York State history. I learned about this case growing up from my grandmother, who was raising her own family at the time. She was actually raising my mother, who was just 6 years old, one town over from where this happened. The case centers around Pamela Moss, a 14-year-old girl who lived in the suburbs of Rochester, New York. At 5'1" and 95 pounds, she was small in stature, but very mature and responsible. She was the babysitter of the neighborhood. She would book out 2 weeks at a time sometimes, and the area parents would fight over who got Pamela, and the little kids would call her Pammy. She grew so close to the kids she babysat for, she used to mail them Valentine's cards for the holiday. She was smart, and she would help tutor other students in reading. She had just entered Penfield High School in the fall of 1962, and she'd only get to go for a couple of days before she would disappear. On Thursday, September 6, 1962, Pamela attended class at school as usual, and neighbors reported seeing her get home from school that day. Her mother, who was pregnant with the family's fifth child at the time, was upstairs when Pamela got home. They briefly spoke between floors, but she never did see her. She told her mother she was going out. Later that evening, she was supposed to babysit for a neighborhood family but never arrived. Her mother had expected her to come home for dinner before the babysitting gig, but when she didn't come home, she assumed she had gone straight there. Pamela lived at 181 Sawmill Drive in the town of Penfield, as shown here, and oftentimes she would walk to the end of her cul-de-sac to the wooded path that served as a cut-through to a new shopping center called Panorama Plaza on Panorama Trail. That Thursday afternoon, the plan had been for Pamela to go with 3 other girls. One friend had glasses she needed picked up, but when she called and found out that they weren't yet ready, they decided to postpone the shopping trip. Pamela had said, "Hey, that's okay, I have some studying to do, we can go Saturday." But it seems as though Pamela decided to take the trip anyways, as she often did. When she didn't come home that night, a full search party was initiated, and groups of law enforcement, fire departments, and civilian volunteers all scoured the woods between Sawmill Drive and Panorama Trail. On Friday, they did not find Pamela, but did find her raincoat in the woods. Shown here is where the dirt path road emptied out and where she would have walked out to, and back along the way is where her coat was found, and it was tossed and covered in some brush. Interestingly enough, that area had already been searched about 3 times. On Saturday, the search came to a tragic end when Pamela's body was found in a watery gravel pit not far from the trail she had been on going to the shopping center, and about a mile from Pamela's home. When interviewed at the time, most of the people in the subdivision didn't even know about the gravel pit, but they did know about the woods Pamela was walking in. At the time, there was a short road that led into the trail area that was then kind of a dead end, but you could technically drive through, and teens and young adults would use it as a lover's lane. Not only that, some local kids would say they'd gone into the woods to play, but would turn around when they would spot what they would call bums out there, and what police labeled as prowlers. Some of these instances occurring in the 2 weeks leading up to Pamela's disappearance and murder. In fact, on the Thursday she disappeared, local police had already walked that trail to do routine patrol at the location. Pamela was found partially nude, face down, at the edge of the watery area of the gravel pit. Before an autopsy was ever even conducted, it was believed she was strangled due to the marks on her neck, and that she was the victim of an SA due to the state of how she was found. Both were revealed to be true. Suffocation was ultimately ruled as the cause of death for Pamela, though trace amounts of water were found in her lungs, leading police to believe she was still alive when she was placed face down in the water. Her body was found with brush covering it in an attempt to conceal. However, her shoes and items of clothing were found strewn about on a nearby hill. So why conceal her body but leave her personal belongings out to be found? Not found with her body or elsewhere was her beige purse she had been carrying, which contained her glasses, rosary beads, and money for shopping. Sheriff Albert Skinner and his team of detectives began questioning anyone from the neighborhood or who had been in the neighborhood on that day, canvassing for information, but they came up empty. They also combed for physical clues in the bottom of the water and along the wooded trail. The community was stunned, but one comment stood out to me. Wallace Howell, who was the principal of Penfield High School at the time, said, quote, "How could a thing like this happen? You see a thing like that in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. It's just a story in a newspaper," end quote. And that is a frequent mindset of the older cases that I cover in my podcast. I mean, even today, it's a self-preservation mindset to say that type of thing happens in other people's towns, not here. But that was even more heightened during this time because there was no 24-hour news cycle or social media. These things were happening, but there wasn't a connected awareness around it. And so in some ways, it gave a false sense of security. Community pressure to arrest a killer mounted quickly, and the neighborhood was in a panic. A $5,000 reward was offered for information, which is about $55,000 in today's money. The panic was palpable, and the Monroe County Sheriff's Department was taking in a flood of tips. One local school teacher reported that she had been touched inappropriately on that same trail recently. Multiple women in the town of Penfield came forward to say that a man in a white compact car had been following them in recent days, and one woman reported that the man yelled obscene things at her. Mothers stopped letting their children play in the woods and ride their bikes as freely. The neighborhood mothers shared that curious onlookers began driving down their street constantly, which created another safety risk of their kids getting hit on bikes. In a sick twist as well, many reported getting creepy crank phone calls at 2 a.m. in the days after the murder. A local psychiatrist would weigh in on the characteristics he thought the killer would possess, stating he thought the man was narcissistic, unwell, and in need of psychiatric care, and that he had been for some time. Ultimately, it would take a former law enforcement officer from another jurisdiction who saw something that reminded him of somebody he had arrested before, and that would lead to a huge break in this case. I talk about that and all the other parts in parts 2, 3, and 4, so go check those out now.